So I'm hoping that some of this work will feed into a better tool set for testers potentially, although we're a long way off that, of course. It's very beginning ideas in what I'm doing. My name's Isabel Evans. I took a computer science degree in the 1970s, and I have been working since the 1980s in software testing and software quality in a variety of different roles. So I've worked as a tester, a test analyst, we would have called it in much of my career, and as a test manager and as a quality manager, which is a slightly different role, looking at processes across a company, not just in the software, but right across the whole company's activities. And I've also done consultancy work in a variety of different domains around testing and quality, and a certain amount of teaching as well in that area. And since 2017, I've been working as a postgraduate researcher at the University of Malta, researching into the experiences of testers with the tools that they use. Well, that's an interesting question, because I think it's interesting with software testing in particular, because people sometimes think that it's quite a boring job. And I would say it's the reverse of that. I would say it's a very interesting job indeed. You have to do a lot of thinking. It's a very skillful job, and you're very frequently working under pressure, and you're constantly problem solving, and you're constantly looking at risk. So it's quite a highly stressful job in many respects. But I think that's what I've enjoyed about it, particularly the problem solving, particularly when you get, say, conflicts between constraints and risks on a project, maybe conflicting different requirements from different stakeholders. Looking at finding ways that you can manage between those and actually come out with what's the best outcome for the organization and for its customers, which isn't always what you expect. It isn't always a technical solution, for example. It isn't always to do more testing. So I would say that's what I've enjoyed most of it, that it's been what, nearly 40 years now, almost continuously changing challenges. So you're always learning something, and that's carried on into the research. So I'm looking at stuff now, ways of working, topics that I've never had to do before. So again, it's constantly about learning, and I think and facing challenges and problem solving. That's what's good about it, the whole thing. Well, and you may not like this answer, but I would say stick to your guns on this one, perhaps. But I think it's very interesting with automation and tooling, because automation isn't actually possible for all of the testing. I would argue there are large chunks of test, even of test execution, that I would say needs to be done with a person's brain driving it. And it needs to be done at a speed. Well, how's the best way of putting this? Sometimes going as fast as possible, which is one of the reasons people automate, isn't actually the best way of finding the problems. Sometimes slowing down and thinking very slowly and stepping through things and looking at things in a critical way is a better way of understanding what's going on and finding out what the problems are. So if I had a team, I was confronted with a team that was refusing to automate, what I'd want to do is understand what their reasons were. And quite often There will be very good reasons for that. There will be aspects of what they're doing which cannot be automated. And even if you automate some of the test execution, there's whole aspects of the whole activity of testing which require thinking, analysis. And so, they may be looking, this team that we're imagining may be looking at it and thinking that their managers or whoever wants the automation is thinking that all of those activities that they know to be cognitive and to do with brain power and requiring human understanding, and in the case of some tests, an emotional response. How would people feel if this is what the software did at this point? You can't automate that understanding. They may have good reasons for fearing that all of that work is misunderstood by their managers. But there will be some aspects of what they're doing where tools can support them. So I would say if there was a team that said we refuse to use any tools at all, then I would be saying to them, here are ways that tools can support you to do some of the tasks. But I don't think automation is necessarily a good goal in itself. I don't think I've answered that very coherently. I'm sorry. I think I've had to do with ChatGPT and looked at it and had a go with it and seen what other people have done with it. I think it's a bit of a blunt instrument. So I would probably not use it for test creation personally, because where I've seen it used, what seems to be happening to me is that you're getting answers that are plausibly okay because they're very standardized. So, and also I've had an experience where I've seen input go in and the output looks plausible, but it doesn't actually reflect the input. I'm not sure that it's something I would trust. So the people I've seen using it successfully, and this is not just in software testing but elsewhere, are people who know enough about what they're expecting of the output and spend enough time checking the output that they can differentiate between where it's worked and where it hasn't. And I think the problem with it is that you probably need to do quite a lot of work to check it out. So, for example, I wrote a report for somebody recently which had a detailed analysis in it that I'd done of some data. And they ran part of my report through chat to get a summary because they wanted a shorter summary than I'd given them. And then started working off that summary. But actually, when I saw the summary and I checked it back into the report, there was a mismatch. So there was some overlap, but there were things that I'd got in the report that hadn't got through to the chat summary. And there were things in the ChatGPT summary which were generically plausible as things that I might have talked about as a result of the analysis, but actually weren't in there. And also the priority order had been changed. So it no longer reflected what the end users had been saying. And this, I think, is the problem with it, that you get results out that look like, plausibly, they might be useful, but in fact, the amount of work you have to do to then go and find out whether that's the right answer, at the moment, you might just as well have gone and done the analysis yourself. So the mistake I made in that particular instance was I should have done a shorter summary, which I could have done myself, and it would have been the right shorter summary instead of the wrong one. So I don't think we're there with it yet, but I'm very concerned that people are starting to trust it. and starting to use it in different ways. Do you know, that almost follows on from the previous answer, because I think there's some illusory things there. We see things on the surface that come out from tools or in the way that tools are behaving, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. So when I started doing the research, I was thinking that there was a problem with the usability of testing tools. And when I actually did the research in a rigorous and academic way, I started by asking people not whether they got a problem, but actually what their experiences were. So it's a step back. So some of the reports I got back were of people having good experiences and some people having not such good experiences. And then I analysed that data. And one of the things that came out was that people did have a problem with the usability of tools. So clearly, for a lot of the people, a lot of the testers who were reporting back to me, the tools that they had to use were not sufficiently good from a usability point of view. But when you dug under that a bit more deeply, this was for a number of reasons. And some of those tools actually had very good user interfaces in that they were attractive and clear and apparently easy to use, but they didn't properly support the actual workflow of the tester. So the usability had been applied in a very superficial manner. It looked good, it looked very appealing, but it didn't actually support what people wanted to do. So the deeper levels of usability that are about the actual goals that people have got and achieving their tasks and feeling that they've been effective were not being supported. So the usability of the tools was an illusion. And so that was one part of it. And then another illusion of usability was that it wasn't enough. Even if you'd got good usability, that's not enough without other quality and use attributes. So one of the things that over and over again people reported was that they had tools to support the testing, which then weren't maintainable. And so the software under test changes, therefore the tests change, therefore everything in the test tool needs to change. And if the tools didn't support that continuous change, they became unusable. People were finding that they were getting a tool, they would use it for a bit, it would become unusable because of the maintenance problems. They would move on to another tool and have the same problems. And there were other, I'm going to say, technical attributes or quality and use attributes which also were not well supported. Some testers were reporting that, for example, there were security issues with the tool, not in the terms of it being insecure because it was allowing data out, but insecure in terms of not allowing the testers in, so that the security access to the tool was set such that they couldn't actually do the work that they wanted to do. The third illusion was around, again, it's related to maintainability, but this idea of things being static. And so it was clear that a lot of people testers were feeling that the tools that they were using didn't support them in their own growth. And so you had people who were not particularly technical and finding the tools too technically difficult to use. So they weren't being supported in initial learning. You also had people who were technically able and were finding that they couldn't actually use the tools in a technically proficient way because the interface of the tool didn't allow them to. So it wasn't allowing for different types of people. And it wasn't allowing for growth as people were learning their craft, learning about the software domain, and indeed learning about the tool set. So one of the things I think it would be really great would be if test tools could support people through personal growth and through changes to the software under test. And I think those were three key messages out of that particular paper. There were other papers that had other messages that came out from the data, but we'll not cover those today, I think. So coming out of that work, I started to think that maybe the reason that the usability was being treated in a superficial manner was perhaps that test tools designers may not have had an understanding really of who was testing. And it was becoming clear to me from that early data, it was a greater range of people than I, with all my experience in the industry, was expecting. So I did another little research, which was looking at who is doing testing, industry-wide survey, over 70 respondents, which is a large number for a piece of qualitative research, with their stories about themselves and their hobbies and how they worked and what type of testing they did and how the approaches they took and what tools they looked, all that sort of thing. So I've just got that written up to talk about who is testing, and that it is a very, very heterogeneous and diverse group of people in all sorts of ways. And one of the things coming out of that is, if you look at what tool sets those people are going to need, there's going to be a diversity of their needs. Even if you've got the same underlying functionality, it's supporting different types of people with different needs, different goals, at different stages, coming from all sorts of different backgrounds. Many of them not with software engineering backgrounds. And so that, I think, is an interesting idea for people designing tools. So coming out of that, what I'm working on at the moment, so that paper's in draft and out for review, and my current piece of work now is based on all of that work. I'm trying to come up with some heuristics that might help guide people who are designing test tools in order to make that set of test tools one that supports who the testers actually are and what they're actually doing. And I think, going back to your first question about what would I say to people who are refusing to use automation, there's kind of a reason for that. And it's because there's a richness of and diversity of people and activities and types of testing and goals for the testing and all sorts of things like that, which mean just using the word automation is too thin. You know, there's a whole bunch of other things that are needed. So I'm hoping that some of this work will feed into a better tool set for testers potentially, although we're a long way off that, of course. It's very beginning ideas in what I'm doing. I got into speaking by accident. I didn't set out to be a speaker at conferences or indeed to teach testing or any of those things, or to write a book. It's all just happened almost by accident along the way. And I remember I was in a forum meeting and Dot Graham was there, and I'd met her on a couple of occasions. So it was a sort of special interest group meeting, but not actually the SIGist, I think. And we'd been talking about different things and discussing things in a group around quality and testing and so on and so forth. And she said to me, "You should come and give a talk." And I was really surprised and was sort of saying, no, that would be a ridiculous idea. But she persuaded me. And so I went and gave a talk. And it went quite well. I was just chatting away about the project I was working on at the time. People seemed to appreciate it. And then she said to me, "Oh, you should apply to speak at Eurostar." And I just thought that was a laughable idea. But again, she persuaded me and I put in an application and got accepted. And that was 1990 something. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember going out to the conference and giving my talk and just being so excited to be at a big European conference. And again, people really liked the talk. And I was really surprised because I remember I was so nervous beforehand. I still always am really nervous before I do any sort of speaking, or before something like this. I sort of beside myself before coming on to the interview. You know, like this isn't going to work. And then following on from that, it was just a series of things where I was doing projects and I'd start chatting to people about them and they'd say, "Oh, come and give a talk about that." So I think the end result of that is now at this stage, when I hear people younger than me talking about their projects, my response is very often, "Go and give a talk about that," because it's almost that's paying back what Dot did for me and what other people did for me. But I think that's the key about speaking. You need to be taking in something that's your own real story, something you've really done, because many other people at that conference will be experiencing similar challenges, and so they'll appreciate hearing about yours, and then sharing it also means that you can hear from other people, solutions they've found. And then one particular conference I remember, I'd done a project which was, for me, was the biggest project I'd ever done. And I was asked to go and give a talk about it at a particular conference. And the topic was big projects and how we deal with them. So I did my talk and talked about how immense this task had seemed. It really had. It was, was for me, it was huge. And then the person coming on after me had done the testing for one of the IBM mainframe systems. And he just started his talk by saying that he'd realized, listening to me, that a big project isn't a big project because it's the biggest project, because his was clearly huge compared with mine. It's the biggest project you've done at that point. That's a big project. And I just thought that was so wise, but also so kind, because he could have completely put me down. And he didn't. He chose to acknowledge that, it's kind of like, I would say it's almost the case that whatever you're doing in this industry, so coming back to, what's interesting about this job, whatever your next challenge is, it's going to feel like the biggest project you've ever done. So, take that back to conferences and share it, because other people need to know that as well. So looking back from where I am now, 68, and I've gone back to being a student, I think the key thing is lifelong learning. Absolutely key. Not just because the industry changes all the time, but actually because you change all the time. So for you, clearly much younger than I am, it's kind of like you need to be thinking not, now I've learned the things that I need to know. You need to be thinking, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 25 years' time, I might be doing something completely different. And that's okay. It's actually, that constant growth and learning is, I think, what's so important. And all the time, take the opportunities that come up for you. Just keep seizing out, grabbing the opportunities, and essentially do what you want to do, because you've only got one life. So kind of enjoy it.